I found it. A bill that proved my own daughter used my card to fund a wedding I wasn't even invited to. They didn't just leave me out, they erased me. Now, before she walks down that aisle, she's going to remember the man she tried to cut from her story still holds a pen. The receipt sat in front of me like a wound I couldn't close. Every number bleeding a story I was never meant to hear. My daughter's wedding booked, paid for, and celebrated on paper, without my name anywhere in it. The emergency card I'd given her for life's hard moments had become her ticket to erase me. They hadn't just left me out. They'd rewritten the script as if I'd never been cast. The late afternoon light through the kitchen window was pale, almost metallic, like it had lost the will to warm the room. My coffee sat untouched, cold and bitter before I even tasted it. I traced each line on the statement with the side of my finger. Every vendor, every deposit, feeling the truth settle in my chest like stones in deep water. This wasn't carelessness. This was precision, planned, hidden, executed. And for the first time in years, the silence around me didn't feel peaceful. It felt like a dare. I could have called her right then, demanded an explanation, unleashed the outrage that was clawing its way up my throat. But rage burns fast, and I've lived long enough to know the slow burn cuts deeper. I pushed the paper aside, not to forget it, but to see it in the corner of my vision while my mind worked. My late wife had a saying, never bleed where your enemies can see it. I wasn't about to hand my daughter that satisfaction. The first plan formed like fog, quiet but inevitable. If they thought I would fund a celebration I wasn't invited to, they were about to learn that I still knew where every lever was and how to pull them. This wasn't about stopping the wedding. It was about making sure, when she looked back on that day, my absence was the loudest thing in the room. I folded the statement, slid it into the drawer beneath the phone, and let my hands rest there a moment. They'd been shaking before. Now they were steady. Whatever came next would be deliberate, surgical. And it would start with the one thing no bride can afford to lose. The next morning, I was on the road before the sun had burned the mist off the fields. The venue was only 20 minutes away, but I drove slow, letting every mile settle the weight of what I was about to do. When I pulled into gravel lot, the place looked like it had stepped out of a glossy magazine. White pillars catching the pale light, manicured lawns stretching like they were rehearsing for the photos. I sat in the truck for a moment, watching a young couple pose under a willow, the bride-to-be laughing as if nothing in the world could touch her. Inside, the scent of fresh polish and expensive flowers clung to the air. The receptionist looked up with a smile trained to make anyone feel welcome, until I gave my name. Her hands hesitated on the keyboard, the smile stiffening just enough to tell me she'd found the booking. "I'm afraid I can only discuss the event with the account holder," she said. I slid the folded statement across the desk, the one with every charge circled in black ink. "I'm the one who paid for it," I told her, steady as stone. Her eyes moved from the page to me, and in that tiny pause, I knew the balance of power had shifted. She explained the process. Dispute the charge, void the booking, refund the deposit. I didn't flinch. Every word was a thread I pulled, unweaving the day my daughter had built without me. By the time I stepped back into the cold air, the venue was gone from her list and back in my hands. I thought the first call from her might take hours. It took minutes. No greeting, no hesitation, just her voice, sharp and breathless. "Why did you cancel my venue?" I didn't lie. I didn't cancel it. I took back what you charged without my permission. Her anger came quick and clean, but I didn't raise my voice. "You ruined my wedding," she said. "No," I replied. "You did that the moment you decided I didn't belong there." And then, before the heat could twist my words, I ended the call. The quiet afterward was heavier than before, but it didn't press me down. It held me up. The venue was just the first stone. There were more to pull, and when I was done, the entire structure would feel the loss that be why the next morning, the sting of her voice still echoed in my head. But it didn't slow me. The venue was gone. Now it was time to take the bloom out of her picture-perfect day. I parked outside a small, brick-front flower shop tucked between a bakery and a bookshop. The bell over the door chimed softly when I stepped inside, the air heavy with the scent of lilies and roses that looked like they'd been bred to never wilt. A young clerk led me to the back where the owner, an older man with weathered hands and a careful way of wiring orchids, looked up when he heard my name. "Your father," he said, like it was both fact and warning. I told him about the card, about the charges she'd made without permission. His expression shifted from professional politeness to something harder. When I said I wanted the order canceled, he hesitated, explaining about imported stock, costs already sunk. Half refund, he offered at last. I leaned in, lowering my voice until it was almost a whisper. I don't care about the money. I care that not a single petal from this shop ends up in that wedding. The silence between us felt like a handshake before he even nodded. If that's what you want, he said. It is. I told him and walked out into the brittle cold. The sweet smell of flowers clinging to my coat like a memory I didn't ask for. The caterer would be trickier. She'd chosen a company run by an old friend of her fiancé, which meant they'd already be bracing for my call. The man on the other end was brisk, certain, almost smug. He told me the payment was confirmed. The contract binding, cancellation not an option. I kept my voice even, told him what would happen if he served food at an event funded by a stolen account. There was a pause long enough for me to hear the clatter of plates in the background, then a sigh. Partial refund, legal paperwork to follow. I agreed without warmth. This wasn't a victory. It was a reminder that my reach extended further than they thought. When I hung up, I felt the first flicker of something I hadn't felt in weeks. Control. Not revenge. Not yet, but control. And I knew it was only a matter of time before one of them showed up at my door, thinking they could talk me down. That was a mistake I was counting on. IT didn't take long. By late afternoon, I heard the crunch of tires on my driveway and saw a familiar figure through the window. No call ahead, no warning. The knock was loud, impatient, like he was already sure he'd win before the door even opened. I leaned against the frame, letting the cold air between us do most of the talking. "What the hell are you doing?" my son demanded, his voice tight enough to snap. I didn't move, didn't blink. "I could ask you the same," I said. His jaw clenched. "You've canceled the venue, the flowers, and now the catering. Do you have any idea how much chaos you're causing?" I almost smiled. "Plenty. That's the point." This is her day, he tried again, as if repetition could turn it into something I believe. I stepped forward just enough for him to feel the weight in my voice. "No, this is the day she tried to erase me, and you helped her hold the pen." The words landed harder than I expected. He looked away, rubbing the back of his neck, suddenly unsure where to put his eyes. We didn't think you want to be there," he muttered. I laughed once, sharp and humorless. "You didn't think at all. I'm not your enemy, but you both treated me like one, so now you get to see what that feels like." He opened his mouth, closed it again, then turned and walked back to his car without another word. I watched the taillights fade into the dark, the sound of his engine trailing off like a door closing on something we might never open again. By nightfall, the house felt quieter than it had in years, not peaceful, but purposeful. I picked up the phone, dialed 2 numbers I knew by heart. One to my bank, to start a fraud investigation on every charge she'd made in the last few months. The other to my lawyer, not for sympathy, but for strategy. I wasn't just taking back my money anymore. I was taking back the ground they thought I'd abandoned. And before this was over, they were going to learn that the man they cut out of their story still knew exactly how to write the ending WY the following morning. I knew the ripple would come back in a wave. You don't take pieces out of someone's wedding without them noticing the pattern. It didn't come from her directly. It came as an email, short and sharpened, stamped with the weight of law office's letterhead. My daughter, it said, disputed my claim. She maintained I'd given her permission and my blessing. Any further interference, it warned, would result in immediate legal action. I read it twice, then a third time. The phrase, your blessing, cutting deeper with every pass. It wasn't just a lie. It was crafted a twist in the wound, to plant doubt if this ever saw a courtroom. I called my lawyer immediately, his voice half amusement, half steel. "Then it's time you stop playing nice," he said. That afternoon, I walked into my bank branch, where the air always smelled faintly of paper and caution. The manager's polite smile didn't quite reach her eyes as I laid out my instructions. Freeze all secondary access. No pending charges without me present. She hesitated. "That will cut off any link cards, including I cut her off. I know exactly what it will do." Her pen hovered for just a second before she signed the order. By the time I got home, the sky had turned the color wet slate, the air thick with the kind of stillness that always feels like it's holding its breath. My phone rang before I even hung my coat. Her voice was sharp enough to leave marks. "You froze the account? Are you out of your mind? Deposits are due." I leaned back in the chair, letting her words run out of breath. "That's the thing about deposits," I said quietly. "They're just promises. And promises can be broken by both sides." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was the sound of her realizing she wasn't the only one who could set the terms anymore. The call ended, but the tension it left behind didn't fade. It thickened. The kind of heaviness that doesn't just hang in the air. It starts filling your lungs. I stayed in the chair for a while, watching the last of the daylight slip off the porch, feeling the quiet crawl back into the house like it was claiming the walls again. But this quiet was different. It wasn't the absence of sound. It was the presence of intent. If she thought freezing the account was my last move, she hadn't learned a thing. I picked up my coat and drove across town to a small garage lit by a single hanging bulb. Jerry, a man who'd spent more years bending rules and following them, was under the hood of an old pickup. He didn't even look up when I said I needed a favor. "What kind?" he asked. "The kind where the city's health inspector takes a sudden interest in a certain venue," I replied. He grinned the way a man does when he's reminded life still has teeth. "You always did like to play the long game," he said. By the time I got back home, the rain had started, soft at first, tapping on the windows like a question it already knew the answer to. I stood at the kitchen counter, watching water bead on a glass, and thought about the look on her face when she realized this wasn't about canceling a wedding. This was about pulling every thread until the whole thing unraveled in her hands. I poured myself a coffee I wouldn't drink, letting the steam rise between me and the reflection in the window. The storm outside was just getting started, and so was mine up by the next afternoon. The pieces were moving faster than I expected. A call came from a number I didn't recognize, polite voice, official tone, confirming a follow-up inspection at the venue to address outstanding compliance matters. I thanked her without asking questions I already knew the answers to. The moment she hung up, I could almost hear the faint cracking of something that had been built too quickly and without care. I didn't sit around waiting to see how it would play out. I drove to the floors to finalize the split refund we discussed, sliding the signed form across the counter like a chess piece I'd been holding back. The owner gave me a look, half respect, half caution, and promised the Blooms would never see the inside of that ceremony. It wasn't about the flowers. It was about the absence they would leave behind. From there, I headed to the caterer's back door, the smell of roasting meat drifting into the cool air. The man who greeted me wore the same guarded expression he had over the phone, but when I told him to take the remaining credit and deliver meals to the community pantry, something shifted in his face. A deal made not for profit, but for principle. We shook on it, both knowing the gesture would carry further than the food. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the receipts and signed agreements stacked neatly in front of me. Each paper was a brick in a wall she would have to face before the vows were ever spoken. I didn't need to raise my voice, or even be in the same room. The message would carry without me. And still, I knew this was only the middle of the game. The real hit hadn't landed yet, but when it did, it wouldn't be something she could replace 2 days later. The storm finally broke, just not the one outside. The venue's manager called me personally, his voice brittle under the weight of rehearsed courtesy. We decided to relocate all upcoming events to our outdoor garden space, he said, pausing like he hoped I might offer him an escape. I didn't. I let the silence press on him until he stumbled into an excuse about abundance of caution and pending compliance updates. I thanked him, hung up, and wrote the change down in my ledger, not because I needed a record, because I wanted to see it in ink. Indoor ceremony gone, comfort gone, control gone, a shift they couldn't hide under flowers and music. That evening, the rain came hard against the windows, the kind that makes the world outside vanish in a curtain of silver. I boiled a pot of soup, the smell of garlic filling the kitchen, and sat at the table while the house seemed to breathe with me. Every move I'd made so far had been deliberate, calculated, but now the edges were closing in. The wedding wasn't falling apart. It was shedding pieces, and the gaps were starting to show. I didn't expect her to call, but she did. The anger in her voice was stripped bare now. No ornament, just raw frustration. Outdoor ceremony. Bare tables. People asking questions. She was breathing hard, like each word was costing her more than she wanted to pay. I told her the truth. I wanted the truth to show, and it's showing. Her answer was a threat dressed as a promise. You'll regret this. I let the word sit between us for a long moment, then said, I regret what I taught you before now. I won't regret this. And in the pause that followed, I realized she wasn't only losing her plans. She was losing her grip. The next morning, the air felt heavy, thick with that charged stillness that comes before something breaks. I stood at the edge of my porch, coffee in hand, watching pale mist curl over the grass. Down the road, a delivery truck slowed in front of my daughter's house. Two men wrestled with a crate taller than either of them, wrapped in white fabric and tied with gold cord. They didn't look at each other, didn't speak, just moved with the uneasy rhythm of people doing someone else's bidding. By afternoon, the whisper started. A neighbor dropping off mail mentioned a shipment from overseas. Another claimed to have seen her fiancé in the driveway, sleeves rolled up, barking orders. Each detail was harmless alone, but together they formed the outline of something I couldn't quite see, something she hadn't told me. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text. No greeting, no name, just a picture. My daughter's smile, fixed and perfect, standing beside a towering display of fresh-cut flowers. Not in the garden, not under the stripped-down setup the venue had promised me. Indoors, draped in gold and candlelight like nothing had changed. Beneath the image for words, everything is still happening. My pulse climbed, but I stayed still. I knew then, she wasn't just sidestepping me. She was building something behind my back, something that could unravel every move I'd made. And if I didn't act now, the next time I saw her smile in a photograph, it might be too late to change anything. That night, I couldn't sleep. The glow from the street lamp spilled across my bedroom wall, slicing to the dark like a blade, and every time I closed my eyes, that photo came back, her smile frozen, her eyes not quite meeting the camera. I kept hearing the echo of those 4 words. Everything is still happening. They didn't sound like reassurance. They sounded like a warning dressed as comfort. I replayed every recent conversation, every shift in her tone, every little moment I brushed aside as stress or distraction, the way she'd avoided certain questions, the strange gaps in her schedule, the sudden changes in her stories. Patterns emerged, like faint ink bleeding through paper. Something or someone was pulling the strings, and she was playing along or trapped in it. By morning, my patience was gone. I drove past her street, moving slow enough to catch details without being noticed. The drapes were drawn tight in every window. No music, no movement, just that uneasy stillness that makes you feel watched even when you can't see anyone. Then, just as I was about to drive off, I caught it, a shadow moving behind the curtain in the upstairs room. Tall, too tall to be hers. I gripped the wheel, my chest tightening. If that shadow belonged to who I thought it did, then this wasn't just about a hidden dinner or a private party anymore. This was about something far more dangerous, something I was never meant to see. That I stayed there, engine idling low, pulse drumming in my ears. The air outside looked still, but I could feel it, an invisible current, something electric crawling over my skin. That upstairs curtain shifted again, not like someone walking past, but like someone standing there, holding it open just enough to watch. My eyes locked on that narrow gap, waiting for a face to emerge. Seconds stretched into something heavier, something that felt like a dare. Then, without warning, the curtain snapped shut. The sudden movement made my stomach drop. Whoever was up there didn't want to be seen, and now they knew I was looking. My hands tightened around the steering wheel, but I didn't move. Leaving would mean surrendering that moment, and I couldn't. Not when the air between us was so charged, so full of unspoken threat. Then a sound, a door latch clicking somewhere in the house. I shifted my gaze just in time to see the side gate swing inward, slow and deliberate. A figure stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with a calm that felt wrong. He didn't glance around. He didn't have to. He knew I was there, and his stillness was the kind you only see in people who don't need to rush to be dangerous. And in that moment, I understood this wasn't a coincidence. This was a meeting I hadn't agreed to, but one he had been expecting all along. That he stopped halfway down the path, the kind of pause that felt rehearsed, like a man deciding just how much of himself he wanted me to see. The shadows clung to him, his face half hidden under the brim of a weathered cap, but there was no mistaking the weight in his stare. It wasn't curiosity. It was recognition, as if he was remembering me from somewhere I didn't want to recall. A breeze moved between us, carrying the faint scent of cutwood and something sharper, metal, maybe oil. My fingers hovered over the door handle, torn between the urge to confront and the instinct to flee. He didn't move closer, but the way his shoulders squared told me he didn't need to. He was already inside my space, inside the moment, pressing against the edges of my calm. Then he did something that made my pulse spike. He smiled. Not a warm smile, not even a mocking one. It was thin, deliberate, the kind that says, I know something you don't, and you won't like finding out. My jaw tightened as the air seemed to thicken, the silence between us becoming louder than any words could be. And when he finally spoke, his voice was low enough that I had to lean forward to catch it. 5 quiet words that unraveled the ground beneath me. The 5 words slid out of him like they'd been waiting in the dark for years, tasting the air before finding my ears. My chest tightened, because it wasn't just what he said, it was the way he said it. No rush, no tremor, no hesitation. Like a fact carved into stone long, before I'd arrived at this moment. I swallowed hard, my fingers still gripping the cold metal of the door handle, but now the world beyond that door felt miles away. Every instinct screamed at me to demand answers, but some deeper, older part of me knew, once I asked, there would be no going back. His eyes stayed locked on mine, steady, patient, almost daring me to invite the truth in. Then, without warning, he took a single step forward, and the gravel under his boot cracked the stillness like a gunshot. The sound jolted me, breaking the strange spell for just a heartbeat. Yet it was enough to let me notice the object in his hand. Small, unremarkable at first glance, but the longer I stared, the more I realized it didn't belong here, with him, in this place. And somehow, I knew it had everything to do with me. When he tilted it just enough of the light to catch its edge, I felt my breath stop, my thoughts scatter. Because in that split second, I saw exactly what it was, and every unasked question turned into something far more dangerous. It was a photograph. Creased at the corners, the surface dull from years of being touched and hidden away. He held it between 2 fingers like it weighed nothing, but his grip was too deliberate, too careful, as if letting go would mean losing control of more than just paper. The image wasn't clear at first, shadows swallowing half the frame. But as my eyes adjusted, I caught the outline of faces, 3 of them. One was mine, years younger, caught mid-laugh in a way I didn't remember. The second, a woman I couldn't place, yet something about her posture stirred a memory I couldn't quite reach. And the third, that's when my pulse kicked against my ribs, hard and unrelenting. He watched me process it, his silence pressing in until it felt like the air itself was narrowing around us. I wanted to ask, but the question tangled in my throat, caught between fear and the sick certainty that I already knew the answer. He didn't rush, didn't explain. He just let the moment stretch until it threatened to snap. Then he said something so quietly, I almost missed it. 6 words that cut through every layer of doubt I had left. My knees locked, my grip on the door handle tightening, like it was the only thing keeping me upright. Because if those words were true, then everything I thought I understood about the last 2 decades wasn't just wrong. It was a lie built to protect me from something far worse. That MY hands were trembling now. Not from cold, but from the weight of what it just said. The air in the room thickened, pressing against my lungs until every breath felt like it had to fight its way out. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant creak of a branch scraping against the side of the house. Mundane sounds that somehow made the moment feel even more unreal. His eyes didn't leave mine. They weren't asking for permission to continue. They were testing me, gauging whether I was ready to hear the rest or if I'd break under it. I wanted to speak, to demand answers, but there was a part of me terrified that the truth would be worse than anything I could imagine. My fingers tightened around the photograph, and I realized too late. that I was holding it so hard the edges were starting to curl. He stepped closer, the floorboards groaning under his weight, and lowered his voice again. "They weren't supposed to find out," he murmured, the words sharp enough to splinter through my chest. My mind immediately began racing. Who were they? And what exactly was it they weren't supposed to know? The thought bloomed in my head like a dark stain, spreading fast, threatening to swallow reason whole. Before I could press him for more, the sound of a car door slamming outside sliced through the tension. We both froze. His jaw tightened as his gaze shifted toward the window, then back to me. "It's starting sooner than I thought," he said, and for the first time, I saw something in his expression that unsettled me more than his words. Fear. The low rumble of an engine drifted to the half-open window, followed by the crunch of tires on gravel. My pulse quickened, each beat thudding in my ears like a warning drum. I moved toward the curtain, but his hand shot out and gripped my wrist, not rough, but firm enough to stop me cold. His eyes locked on mine, silently telling me not to look. "Listen to me," he said, his voice sharp but low, as though the walls themselves might betray us. "If they see you here, if they even suspect you've heard what I just told you." He stopped mid-sentence, glancing toward the door. A shadow passed across the frosted glass, slow and deliberate, like whoever was out there wanted us to know they were waiting. The air inside felt heavier now, thick with an unspoken dread. I could hear faint footsteps on the porch, measured, patient. Whoever it was didn't knock. Instead, the stillness was broken by the faint metallic click of something being set down against the doorframe. His jaw tensed. I saw him glance toward the hallway, toward the old cedar chest he'd always kept locked, the one he'd never explained. A cold ripple crawled up my spine. He moved toward the chest without another word, pulled a small brass key from his pocket, and turned it in the lock. The lid groaned open, and even in the dim light, I caught a glimpse of what lay inside, objects I didn't understand, but instinct told me they weren't meant to be seen by just anyone. He looked back at me, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Once this starts, there's no going back." He reached into the chest and pulled out a worn leather pouch, its edges frayed, the drawstring darkened from years of handling. The faint scent of cedar and dust rose up, mixing with the colder air drifting from the doorway. His fingers hesitated on the knot, his eyes searching mine, as though silently asking if I truly wanted to see what had been hidden all this time. Before I could answer, the sound outside changed. The footsteps were gone, replaced by the slow creak of the porch boards under new weight. The shadow on the frosted glass shifted again, but this time it lingered. My breath caught as I realized whoever it was hadn't left. They were listening. He loosened the drawstring and tipped the pouch into his palm. A scattering of small, metallic shapes tumbled into view, each one etched with markings I didn't recognize, their surfaces dull by age, yet carrying a strange gravity, as if they were heavy with more than just metal. One of them, a small disc with jagged edge, seemed to pull his gaze like a magnet. "This," he whispered, "is the reason they'll never let you walk away." The word sent a chill through me, but before I could speak, a new sound cut through the room, a slow, deliberate knock, 3 times, then silence. We both froze, the air between us charged, our eyes locked in the knowledge that whatever was on the other side of that door had been waiting for this exact moment. The knock still echoed in the hollow of my chest as he motioned me toward the far corner, his voice low and urgent. "Don't answer it, not yet." The firelight flickered across his face, deepening the lines that fear had carved there over years. His hand hovered near the pouch, as if shielding it from whatever presence loomed beyond the door. Another sound followed, fingers grazing the wood, slow and deliberate, like they were tracing the outline of the frame. The house seemed to hold its breath. Even the wind outside had stilled, the silence pressing in until it became almost unbearable. I could hear the faint shift of weight from one foot to the other on the porch, the creak timed with each heartbeat in my ears. Then, without warning, the handle turned just enough to make the latch click. Not fully, just enough to tell us they could come in if they wanted. He moved in front of me instinctively, his shoulders tight, his stance a barrier. My pulse pounded as I realized this wasn't a stranger testing the door. This was someone who knew exactly who was inside. His eyes darted toward me, and in that split second, I saw a decision forming, a dangerous one. If they crossed that threshold, he said under his breath, You run, no matter what you hear behind you. And as the door began to edge inward with a whispering creak, I understood we were already far past the point of no return. The door eased open another inch, the thin slice of moonlight cutting across the dusty floorboards like a blade. My breath caught, and instinct made me take a single step back, my heel brushing the leg of the old chair. The sound felt deafening in the stillness. A figure stood in the gap, tall, shoulders slouched forward as if they carried something heavy or were hiding something. Their face was hidden in shadow, but the slow turn of their head told me they were looking directly at us, not searching, not guessing, knowing. He shifted his stance, planting his feet as though he was ready for whatever was about to come through. His voice dropped even lower now, a warning meant only for me. No matter what they say, you don't speak. The flicker of the fire caught his eyes, revealing something I hadn't seen before, not fear, but resolve so sharp it made my own chest tighten. The figure outside didn't move closer, but the air between us was charged, thick with an unspoken history I wasn't part of, yet somehow was about to be pulled into. And as the door groaned again under the pressure of their hand, I realized that once it opened all the way, the night would not go back to what it was. The door finally gave way with a slow, reluctant creak, spilling cold night air into the room. The scent of wet earth and iron carried in, sharp and unsettling. My pulse pounded against my ribs as the shadows stepped fully inside, the light from the fire carving their face into stark halves, one side illuminated in flickering amber, the other lost in darkness. They didn't speak at first. They just let their gaze drift across the room, pausing on every corner like they were counting the walls, memorizing the exits. His hand brushed mine under the table, a silent reminder, stay still, say nothing. The pressure of that touch was the only thing tethering me to my chair. Then, with a voice low enough to make the air vibrate, the intruder finally spoke. I see you kept the fire burning, even after all this time. The words hung heavy, carrying the weight of something that neither of them wanted me to understand yet. His shoulders stiffened, jaw tightening, and I could feel the battle raging behind his calm expression. A long silence followed, too long, before the stranger took another step forward, closing the distance between us. The boards groaned beneath their boots, and I realized my hands had curled into fists in my lap. Whatever history lived between them wasn't just about the past. It was about what was going to happen next. His eyes flicked toward me for the first time, sharp, assessing, like he was measuring exactly how much I knew. The air between the three of us felt stretched thin, ready to snap at the smallest wrong move. My heartbeat was so loud, I was sure they could hear it, but neither man broke the silence. They stood there, locked in a stare that carried more history than I could possibly unravel. He, the man I thought I knew, shifted his weight, the firelight catching the faint scar across his jaw. You shouldn't be here, he said, his voice even but brittle at the edges. The intruder's lips curled into the faintest smile, not of amusement, but of someone who already knew they were exactly where they belonged. The stranger moved closer to the table, the dim glow sliding over the deep creases in his coat, the glint of something metallic just beneath the fold of fabric. I caught the faintest scent, gun oil and damp leather, and my stomach twisted. My mind screamed to stand, to run, to do something, but my body stayed rooted to the chair. Then he placed a single, weathered envelope on the table between them, his hand lingering there as if daring anyone to touch it. You'll want to see this before you say another word, he murmured. The tension in the room tightened like a rope, every second dragging heavier than the last. And in that moment, I realized whatever was inside that envelope wasn't just about them. It was going to change everything for me, too. The envelope sat between them like a live wire, its edges worn and smudged as if it had passed through too many unsteady hands. Neither man reached for it right away, each waiting for the other to make the first move, as though the mere act of touching it would detonate whatever truth it held. The fire crackled soft in the corner, throwing shadows that danced across their faces, twisting them into masks I barely recognized. Finally, the man I thought I knew dragged the envelope toward him with a slow, deliberate motion. His thumb hovered over the flap, but he didn't open it. His eyes locked on the stranger's, and for a heartbeat, it was as if the entire room was caught between inhale and exhale. Then, with a sudden rip, the seal gave way, and something thin and folded slid onto the table. It was a photograph, creased, faded, but still sharp enough to send a jolt through my chest. My breath hitched before I even understood why. There, frozen in grainy tones, was a scene I had never witnessed, yet somehow, deep down, I knew it was real. The stranger leaned in, his voice low, each word landing like a stone dropped into water. Tell her what happened that night, or I will. A flicker of something. Fear, guilt, maybe both, flashed in the man's eyes. He turned toward me, lips parting as if to speak, but no sound came out. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning everything else. And that's when I realized the truth wasn't just going to hurt me. It was going to destroy everything I thought was safe. His hand trembled as he pushed the photograph toward me, the edges curling under his fingers like it burned to hold it. My eyes locked on the image. 3 figures in rain, one of them unmistakably him, and another me. Only it wasn't me in the way I remembered. My dress was torn, my face turned away, and the third figure had a hand on my shoulder, gripping too tightly. The stranger across the table didn't look away, his stare unblinking, waiting for the fracture to split wide open. I tried to stop it, the man finally said, his voice breaking like glass underfoot. But by the time I got there, it was already, he choked on a word, his knuckles whitening as he clenched the table. The air felt thick, heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I wanted to speak, to demand answers, but my voice was a stone lodged in my throat. The stranger leaned forward, his tone sharp enough to cut through bone. Tell her who you were protecting that night. My gaze darted between them, the room spinning, every heartbeat louder than the last. And then he said it. A name I hadn't heard in years, a name that didn't belong in the same sentence as mine. The room seemed to tilt, the firelight bending into shadows that crawled across the floor. I stood, but my legs felt unsteady, the photograph slipping from my hand and landing face up on the worn wood. The man who'd raised me, who I thought had been my shield, looked away, unable to meet my eyes. And in that moment, I realized the truth wasn't just ugly. It was a weapon, and it had been aimed at me all along. That he finally looked at me then, but there was no warmth in his eyes, only the hollow weight of someone who knew he'd lost the right to call himself my protector. His mouth opened as if to speak, but nothing came out, just the sound of his breath dragging like it had to fight through the silence between us. Every shadow in the room seemed longer, darker, as if they were leaning in, listening for the moment my world would shatter for good. I wanted to scream, to demand the truth in a way that would leave him no place to hide, but my voice was shaking too much to carry the words. Instead, I walked around the table, my steps slow, deliberate, as if each one might be the last before I collapsed under the weight of it all. He reached for my arm, instinctively, maybe desperately, but I pulled back, the contact burning like betrayal through my skin. The stranger's voice was low, almost a whisper, but every syllable landed like a hammer. You think she knows the whole story? Tell her what you traded and who you traded it for. His words cut the air open, and I saw my father's shoulders tense, his jaw tightening, as if he could keep the truth locked inside by sheer will. But there's no locking a truth like that in his claws, and once it starts moving, it tears through everything in its path. My hands curl into fists at my sides, my pulse hammering in my ears. I didn't know if I wanted to hear the rest or run from it, but either way, I knew the moment it left his lips, nothing between us would ever be the same again. His voice finally broke, but it wasn't a confession I'd been bracing for. It was worse. He spoke my name like it was an apology, a plea, and a wound all at once. His eyes glistened, not with the clean sorrow of regret, but with the heavy weight of a man who had crossed a line and kept walking. I could almost see the moment it happened in his mind, the way his gaze drifted past me, as though searching for the version of himself that hadn't yet made the choice to destroy us. When the truth spilled out, it wasn't neat. It came in fragments, jagged and raw. Words I didn't want, names I didn't know. An exchange so calculated it felt less like a mistake and more like a transaction. I stood frozen, the floor steady beneath me, but my chest threatening to cave in. The stranger didn't interrupt, didn't smirk. He just stood there, silent witness to the undoing of everything I thought I understood. And then silence. The kind that presses in on you from all sides, making every breath a deliberate act. My father, my blood, was looking at me like he expected to see the little girl who used to run to him without question. But that girl was gone. Something colder had taken her place, something that understood too clearly that love, once traded, could never be bought back. I turned for the door without another word, feeling the air shift as I passed the man who had dragged this truth into the light. My hand found the cold brass of the handle, and I realized I wasn't shaking anymore. The truth had burned through the last of the trembling. And as I stepped outside into the fading light, one thought anchored itself deep in my mind. Some betrayals don't end with the truth, they begin there.